Well, that left-wing activist group called ACORN, it's like the undead. It's like a zombie. You think you've killed it, but you can't. It just comes back under a different name, but the mission isn't changed. Dan Epstein with us, Executive Director of Cause of Action. Dan has discovered that a California clone rebranding of ACORN, the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, sending out letters looking for contributions to finance Occupy the Capitol. This is another of the Occupy Wall Street clones, which is, not encouraging for people on the right, but it's worse than that. I mean, it's a group that could raise money for purposes like this if it chooses. But since this is a group that's a recipient of federal tax dollars, and since all these dollars are fungible, then directly or indirectly, your tax dollars are going to support a partisan political organization, Occupy, whatever they're calling it this week. What's some of the evidence that you have, Dan, about the same people who had worked in ACORN offices doing the same kinds of things are now doing those very same things for somebody with a different name?
Well, let's just go from coast to coast. Look at California. You have the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment. It's run by a woman named Amy Scher. Amy Scher was the director of California ACORN. Amy Scher, as director of Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, bought the donor lists from Bertha Lewis, who's the director of ACORN. They have the same lists to reach out and get dollars. They have the same membership lists to reach out and fund themselves. It should be no surprise that even though ACORN is, quote-unquote, in bankruptcy, that its arms, its tentacles are still alive and well. Let's move a little eastward. We have in Missouri ACORN is now Missourians Organizing for Reform and Empowerment. We have in Washington, Organizers United for Reform is the former Washington ACORN. Move into Illinois. You have Action Now is Chicago ACORN rebranded. You have Affordable Housing Centers of America is ACORN Housing rebranded. You have Alton Bennett, who is the former director of ACORN Housing, is now the director of Affordable Housing Centers of America. Mike Shea, who is the director of ACORN Housing in Illinois, is now the executive director. They have all of the same employee identification numbers, tax ID numbers. If you move to the East Coast, you have New York ACORN is now New York Communities for Change. Mutual Housing Association of New York is the New York Agency for Community Affairs, which, keep in mind, the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General came out with a recent report finding that New York Agency for Community Affairs was taking tax dollars and potentially using them impermissibly. So we have direct evidence that this federal government, this Department of Justice, knows that there's wrongdoing going on, and yet they're working with one of ACORN's most historical fiscal sponsors, Project Vote. And Project Vote, we know, has transferred federal dollars to ACORN in the past and is likely doing it again.
What kind of federal program specifically channel money to groups like this?
The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has funded to the tune of $1 million housing counseling funds and Section 8 counseling grants to Affordable Housing Centers of America, which is ACORN Housing. What's interesting is Cause of Action staff has actually probed NeighborWorks America, which has historically funded ACORN, and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Government Accountability Office. We've basically pointed out, we've done a very good legal analysis to show that this organization, Affordable Housing Centers of America, is virtually no different than ACORN Housing. We made a number of arguments. Hey, look, they have the same employee identification numbers, same tax ID numbers. Mike Shea worked at both offices. Alton Bennett worked at both offices. For all legal purposes, they're the same organization. And actually, as a matter of law, in legal circumstances, when you want to wind down corporate affairs, you have to actually shut down the corporation, refile the bylaws, refile the corporate documents. ACORN didn't do any of that with the rebranded entities. And the GAO came back to Cause of Action and said, hey, we don't care. We're going to fund this organization. We're going to approve it. We don't think the congressional ban on funds to ACORN applies to this entity. Okay. And so they've continued to get federal dollars, and that means that all federal dollars are at risk going to ACORN.
Dan, thank you for being with us.